for this week's segment of the Rear View presented by BF Goodrich. Fans might typically hear you commentate on the women's tour in the booth, but, your bona fides and your insights are gender agnostic. So for this week's Rear View, we're going to tap into your knowledge for the 2017 JBAY clash between JORDY SMITH and CONNER COFFIN. All right, so for this week's Rear View, we have the 2017 Corona Open JBAY Round 5 resurf between JORDY SMITH and CONNER COFFIN. We get to start with Rule 166.05, so that's exciting. I wasn't here, but this was from the morning. The judge's angle had missed part of Connor's barrel. They went and reviewed footage from, I think, Ryan Perry and determined that, we have to do a resurf, which really never happens. But this was JORDY's second resurf of the event.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, JORDY had to have a resurf in his Felipe Toledo heat, and JORDY just starting this heat. So think about that. He surfed, this is his third heat this day. He did the resurf with Felipe in the morning and Julian Wilson. Then he met up with Connor. Then it was revised. They said, nope. Connor, obviously missed a wave, so the judges had to kind of call a resurf. So this is JORDY's third surf this day. And they actually called the quarterfinals on for later in the day. So JORDY was going to surf 4 times. And, I mean, you tell from that body language that he was fired up.
He looks emotional.
Yeah, CONNER COFFIN, I was actually surfing lows with him yesterday, and he is just so incredibly nice. You see him getting barreled on this section. So, kind of blessing in disguise to have these guys surf against each other again, because the waves were so freaking good. I mean, it's just pumping. I love the emotion from Connor too. Like, this heat meant a lot to both of these guys.
Yeah, because I looked it up too. And so this was JORDY's, blew me away. It was his 10th season on tour in 2017, which is psycho because it seems like a long time. And it was Connor's second. And I think Connor at this stage, he had a lot of success his rookie season, but at this point in the year, he was still struggling to requalify. So as you said, this heat meant a lot. And both of them, world renowned for surfing JBAY really, really well, whether it's through competition or kind of through free surfing edits.
Yeah, I think later in this heat, Shaun Tomson actually calls Connor a keg on legs. So he's just he's so powerful. And I love his lower body and how compact he is and the way that he's able to really lean into these maneuvers. I think Jeffreys Bay's Supertubes in particular, it's just all about that timing, right? And if you kind of mess up the beginning part of the wave and you don't draw a good line and you get kind of behind on what you want to do on the wave, it really messes up everything, where Connor just reads it so beautifully. I think he filmed a movie project in Jeffreys Bay a few years prior, so he'd had a lot of experience out at Supertubes. So it's just it's such a thing of beauty to see such an incredible surfer on this wave, and it really just highlights everyone else's flaws at surfing this wave, because you get so stuck in the moment at JBAY of just wanting to go fast and go down the line and kick out and realize you haven't done a single maneuver.
Well, and I think that's such a big takeaway is and another thing that doesn't necessarily translate for the fans is it's such a huge, fast canvas that any one of these maneuvers with JORDY up on the replay now could be mistimed. You could literally screw up every maneuver in every section and you mistime it for 200, 300 yards. And so someone like JORDY doing what he's doing here, timing-wise, is so impressive.
I mean, even that little takeoff and the stall and that anticipation of what the wall's going to do further down the line. I mean, there's no better feeling than kind of getting that soft roll in at JBAY and then just hitting that inside section where it's drawing off the rocks and seeing that long wall in front of you and recognizing the fact that you've timed it perfectly. You've placed that first maneuver in that critical zone that's really set you up to slingshot you down the line and just tear into the face of the wave. And another thing to note, for JORDY competing at Jeffreys Bay, there is just so much energy. So many people migrate to Jeffreys Bay to come and watch JORDY compete and really put their energy, their time, their support, their love and pride into what JORDY's doing.
Now, is that something unique to JORDY, or is that with Greg Emsley or Sean Holmes when he had the wild cards, or Trav Logie? Do people turn up for them too?
Oh, 100%. The migration to Jeffreys Bay for this event it's like Okavango level. You are just seeing everyone from Cape Town Durban, everyone's making that pilgrimage, bringing their children. And I remember, I mean, back in like 1998, I mean, there are people on screen right now, you can see the crowd. But back in 98, I actually wasn't at the event, but a friend coming home and telling me about a young 13-year-old named Sofia Milanovic, who was the wild card in that event. And it's like for everyone to witness this happen in front of them and the inspiration that they draw from it, it's, I mean, Jordy speaks about it, his getting inspiration from those guys. Shaun Holmes, I mean, he beat, Andy Irons 3 times as a wild card?
Yeah. Big time. I remain a big Andy guy, and it was a big deal in my life when Shaun Holmes kept beating it.
For me as a South African, I was like all pride. Like, yeah, we back our surfers. Like Mikey Febb getting the wild card and then surfing at the elite level when he qualified. Dale Staples, I think, was in this event as the wild card. Greg Emsley, when he's out surfing, it's just like mayhem.
So with Jordy, he grew up in Durban. You guys are about the same age. When did you first encounter Jordy Smith in your life?
So the first time I met Jordy was probably at the South African Junior Champs back in like 1995, maybe 96. I was competing in the under 10 boys division, and he was surfing in the under 8 boys division. And he was just so talented, and it was almost kind of funny because the other boys were almost jealous of Jordy because that's how good he was.
Well, I was going to ask if he was someone from a very, very young age that people are like, he's going to be something special, or if he kind of grew into it. You know, I'd had a similar conversation about Gabriel with Pinga, and Pinga, you know, is notoriously one of the best scouts in Brazil. He always identifies the right talent. And I asked him what happened with Gabriel. He's like, he was good. He just wasn't beating everybody. Like, he developed into that later in life, and now he's sort of a Terminator. But was it apparent from the start with someone like Jordy?
Yeah, Jordy was unbelievable. And he was so ahead too. I remember going to junior events and he was doing air reverses and stuff, and they didn't know how to judge it. You know, it was like, well, is that a trick or is it a maneuver? Like, how does this fit into that scale? So he was really pushing the envelope in the junior series and really also asking more from the judges for the stuff that he was doing.
And you mentioned, you just dropped a little kernel there. You were competing in the boys division as well. So what was that like for you? I mean, I would imagine it was just, there just weren't women's divisions at the time.
Yeah, the women's division was just so much like high. I think it was like an under 18 division, and I was like, I think I was 8 competing in the under 10 boys division. And I'll tell you, there's no better feeling than beating boys in their own division. So I ended up making the final of that South African champs. Damien Farrenfort won, and he'll tell you that he was pretty scared that I might beat him for the backlash that he was going to feel from the rest of the boys.
How often did you get to surf JBAY, being from East London?
I surfed it quite a bit, and I remember my first surf at Supertubes, because you had to kind of work your way. You start down at Albatross, which is kind of the beach break, or Kitchen Windows, a beach break up, and you kind of go, then you get to kind of graduate and surf the point. And then, when you are ready, you get to go out at Supertubes. So I remember my first surf there, I actually was camping with the Bryson family, Royd and Bryson, who spent a number of years on the championship tour. They took me on my first surf experience at Supertubes and to Jeffreys Bay. So those are like super vivid, special memories for me.
We've got Shaun Tomson up on camera right now. My experience with Shaun, he's always so composed and he's so articulate. Growing up in South Africa, can you describe how Shaun was kind of perceived by the surfing community when you were growing up?
Yeah, he was an idol. I mean, one of the first world champs, and just his impact and his legacy. I used to get Spider Murphy surfboards. He was one of the best shapers in South Africa and one of the early supporters of me, and absolutely love those guys. But they, had a lot of experience shaping for Shaun Tomson. So they'd have like the boards hanging up in the factory in the shaping bay, and you'd be like, that's Shaun Tomson's board, and you'd just be like mind blown grommet that like the world champ had surfed that board. And Shaun actually spent a lot of time, like he I remember when I was on the South African squad, he had signed a bunch of his books to all the juniors on the team and like given us a note of encouragement. So he's just always been someone that I look up to.
So both these guys had really high scores at the start. Jordy with a 9.37 and Connor with an 8.67. And if I'm not mistaken, Jordy really hammers one home right now. You want to walk us through this wave?
Yeah, so Jordy rolling in on this wave, kind of takes his time looking down the line, gets that swooping arc. I love that cutback. And then the way that he's just able to time that bottom turn, so he really gets it crispy up in that lip and stays critical. Beautiful bottom turn that sets him up for another arc. Times this maneuver up into the lip, just so much spray. Jordy is just such a powerful surfer. Lays that back arm down. And that's the leg burn factor too. I mean, every one of those maneuvers, you're exerting so much energy. Jordy, another swoop, bottom turn, makes connection with that lip. It's just so beautiful. Like every arcing maneuver, every drop of water is just in its place. He gets a little bit of a shampoo at the end and does the big man claim. Yeah.
And it's such a physically taxing wave, even just standing there, let alone doing everything that he's doing for as long as he's doing it. And as you said, this is already the third time he's had to perform today. He had the resurf for his round 4 heat to start the day. He surfed against Connor in the original round 5 bout, and now he's back in there. So it's just, I mean, for someone of his size and power and strength, like it really is essential to being able to surf that well for that long.
Yeah, and 2017, was this the new improved Jordy when he went on the big fitness regime and just like kind of really finally tuned his whole game? But yeah, I mean, that fitness and also the emotional aspect, I mean, they had to finish out this round before they kind of reviewed the tape and made that decision to have the resurf. So there was a lot of like energy and mental kind of stuff going on in the background for this decision to be made.
Well, since we've had the quarantine going, we've been doing those WSL Vault shows every Monday where we play like a highlight show from the Audis. And I can't remember when it was, but we were rewatching the 2010 Santa Catarina one, and Jordy's like interviewed quite a lot in it. He's just like, I've been training at all. I'm not doing anything at all. Just like, all right, like that's an approach. And he qualified in 2008. And I'm sure you remember, I'm sure it was a huge deal in South Africa. It was a huge deal in the surfing world because he had left his longtime sponsor, Billabong. He had that season or several months where he didn't have a sponsor. There was a huge bidding war for him. He was putting out these edits. He was essentially arrived on tour for the first guy in a long time that was like, I'm here to win a world title in year one. Like, he had so much confidence and talent. And what was it like for you being a fellow South African and kind of watching that whole trajectory of him in the 2008 years?
Oh, incredibly proud. Like, so proud of Jordy. It's ridiculous. And then I don't know if you remember, I think it was one of Kelly's world title acceptance speech at the ASP WSL Awards when he actually like picked Jordy out of the crowd and said, I'm expecting Jordy to win a world title. Do you remember that?
I do, but he did that a lot. Like, he loved to. So here's my 2 cents on Kelly. Like, if he was doing that, he didn't actually consider Jordy a threat on the day. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember, like, he did that with Dane Reynolds after he won bells one time. He like gave a victory speech and he's like, you know, Dane's the best surfer in the world or something. And like Mick and Parko's brains exploded because they're like, what the. For Dane, he was like, I'm not challenging Kelly for a world title, but I think he does that. I think he's like, I'm going to put the spotlight over on this guy to like mess with my actual contenders over here.
He's always 10 steps ahead.
Oh, God.
No, but I definitely remember just being super proud of Jordy and also seeing, I mean, that hard work. Like I said, coming from South Africa, it's not, I mean, you talk about the bidding wars and all of that stuff. For him to get to that point, though, he really had to make that happen for himself. It was all like self-made. No one was like, sometimes you see Grams that are like sponsored up to the teeth and they have these huge expectations. Jordy, we had a lot of expectation, a lot of hope for him, but he had to really forge his way and put in the hard yards to see him get that trajectory and to make that happen for himself. It's just like, it's something that needs to inspire more South Africans to get to that level.
That's such a good point. I think, I was talking to someone about this recently on the podcast, just about growing up in Orange County and seeing how many people were able to get sponsored that were good surfers, but then going on tour and traveling around and just seeing how amazing some surfers were that didn't have any sponsors just because they weren't that close to the industry. So I think that's like a great point about, you just have to work that much harder from South Africa.
Definitely. And I think in South Africa, sport has unified our nation on so many ways. I mean, you look back at the 95 Rugby World Cup. I mean, just winning that as newly elected Nelson Mandela, like the new South Africa was coming into effect and that impact. And then even last year, the South African Springboks won the Rugby World Cup again. And that really, we take it seriously. Like there's a lot of pride in that, and to see Jordy and to be at that level and how that can uplift like a lot of people in the nation is so important.
For sure. So you're talking to Glenn Micro Hall here. When you're on the tools, when you're doing your job, how does that work when you're trying to identify people to speak to?
I mean, it's got to be relevant, right? And it's really filling in the gaps of the story, because Micro obviously was a big part in this resurf happening. Like he's obviously working with CONNER COFFIN and really pushing for this resurf to happen. So, and then at the end of the day, he's got to get his athlete in the mindset to go out and compete and forget about what had happened previously.
For sure. And then Connor's back up and riding here. He's fighting. You and Connor both ride for Rip Curl now. You signed with Rip Curl at the end of 2016. And you mentioned surfing with him at Lowers yesterday. I think I surfed with him at Silverstrand 2 days ago. So he's getting around. Do you get to spend a lot of time with Connor outside of the tour?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's that when you have that familiarity of being on the same team. I think Connor, my mom actually said it from the time he was a rookie, but Connor's actually one of my mom's favorite surfers. And I really like Connor, like interviewing him and interacting with him on the WSL. And even just surfing with him is super fun. But from a Rip Curl standpoint, we do a lot of signings, a lot of like Rip Curl events together. So it's always cool to bump into him.
He's a super nice guy. If you had to predict when competition returns here, actually first walk us through Connor's replay here, because I want to get your insights.
Well, Connor, I mean, Jordy's just dropped the hammer of the 10-point ride coupled with his 9.33. So Connor's getting up on this thing and he is like, he's pissed. Like he wants it back. He wants to get his head back in the game. And every single one of these maneuvers, I mean, we spoke about that timing and just the way that he approached this wave. I think that aggression, but he didn't overpower the wave in a way that like looked kind of funky. It just was a really well-ridden wave, maybe a bit smaller than what we saw from Jordy, and that's maybe where the scores kind of differ. But I think Connor gets a really good score on that one.
We had a rear view a few weeks ago with Kanoe Igarashi. I can't remember from what year it was. We were watching JBAY, and it was the year that Griffin was a rookie. And Griffin Colapinto is such a talent. He's so strong, but the lack of experience out at JBAY showed, because he was able to kind of perform on the wave, but the timing wasn't there because he didn't have the experience. And that's what I'm so struck by watching Connor here, because he's only a sophomore on tour at this stage, but he just has the timing down so well. I'm sure that's from, as you mentioned, like his free surf trips there just to surf and his background, being able to grow up surfing Rincon. I mean, out of all the waves on tour, do you think that experience and just time in the water at JBAY is more important than the other ones?
It's so crucial. Well, in all honesty, you can see people that have spent more time at specific lineups and really put the work in to learn the different indicators of the place, and it pays off so much. And there's only one way to do that, and that's to spend a lot. Wow, that maneuver from Jordy was ridiculous. But there's only one way, the two-turn combo. I mean, just that massive tail slide and then that attack of the lip. But there's only one way to do that. That's time in the water. That's really like paying your dues, speaking to locals. And I think Carissa did that so well. She got one of the locals in South Africa to help her at Jeffreys Bay this last year, where she was able to win the event. It's such a huge advantage to go and put the time in it and really learn the wave.
For sure. So Jordy's up here. He's got a 10 and a 937. I think that last wave, you see him really push the first turn, because at this point, he's like, I got a better at 937. I pretty much, if I'm going up on a wave here, I'm going as hard as I can. But Jesus, his equipment looks really good in this heat too. I mean, it's really sharp. He's someone who, in my experience, he's used a lot of different shapers over the course of his career, and he's someone who I remember from his first event on tour at Snapper Rocks, he had so many boards. Like he was, again, like the hot prospect. I think he had like over 50 boards. I've heard just from different shapers that wanted to get him boards. And I remember thinking like, man, I think I'd have like selection paralysis if that was happening.
Lucky for Jordy, I mean, his dad's a shaper, Graham Smith, so he's got a good grasp on what's happening when it comes to equipment. So I think he could, you know, there are those people that pick up a board and instantly put it under their arm, feel it, and know how it's going to work. I mean, I wonder what he's on here, like a Tucker Grinder or a Rook 15, or I know it's an Almeric. He was still on the Almerics at that stage?
I think he's on the Almerics at that stage. But even for yourself, like you mentioned Spider Murphy, you rode for Spider Murphy. I think you rode for DH, CI, and now Firewire. You know, how would you rate your own kind of like board intelligence? Like, are you someone that really gets into the details, or are you just like, just give me something that works? Because I've noticed the CT surfers are either kind of one or the other. Like they know everything about board design, or they're just like, I don't want to know, just give me something that works.
Yeah, I think I'm like kind of on that other kind of spectrum. I came out of the garage the other day because I wanted to change fins in my surfboard, and I just held up a couple sets to my husband, and I was like, you need to help me. Like, because I think a lot of the time at this moment in my life, I'm kind of just stoked on whatever I get. I ride a lot of twin fins and like quad fin 5.2, 5.3 boards. But back then, I think I should have spent a lot more time really familiarizing myself with equipment and learning those intricacies, because I think that would have been so beneficial to my career if I just spent that time going over that stuff and really dialing in my quiver, and maybe even not being afraid to experiment on different kinds of things. So I think, you mentioned there's either one or the other. I think I was just a little bit on that other side of being a bit ignorant.
Now, you made it to the elite level of championship tour competition, and other South Africans in recent years, or maybe not so recent years, you know, Wendy Boita, Greg Emsley, Trav Logie, Davey Weir, Royden Bryson, Jordy, Bianca Batendog, Mikey February. But Ricky it's not Gasnets. A huge amount of surfers for the region. You know, the region's got such good waves and such amazing surfers. We've got Matthew McGillivray coming in as a rookie when competition resumes. I know we talked about kind of the how, because it's so far away from everything, it's that much harder for people to break through. Are you still very connected to the surfing community in South Africa? And if so, who do you kind of see coming up on the men's and women's side next from the country?
You know what? I'm actually a little bit like ashamed to say that I keep an eye on it a little bit, but I think I could definitely spend a bit more time being more connected. And looking back at when we were younger, I think, you know, a lot of what we experienced and the success of seeing, like, you know, in quick succession, a lot of South Africans on tour was the fact that we had a lot of junior events. Like there was like just the opportunity to surf in a lot of events, get your head wrapped around competing. There was a lot of talent. So that just festered and created like this very competitive atmosphere. So people improved really quickly. They also like got to set goals for themselves because they realized, hey, this is what I want to make my career. So I think that was crucial.
Yeah, and we've noticed it, like, I think strong domestic tours really breed great talent. You know, I think when surfers from a young age feel like they have to travel internationally, and you kind of have that dilution of talent in the same space at the same time, it's harder, right? So if you have a really strong domestic tour and you get surfers that are growing up and matriculating through that tour and pushing each other, they kind of come out the other side. And when they do hit the international stage on the QS, they're that much better.
100%. I mean, it just fosters that talent. There's that, infrastructure for them to learn the framework of what it's going to take to compete. And it gets so cutthroat when you're that young competing and you identify, you know, your opponents, and you just create like this competitive nature for yourself and really just can envision yourself getting to, the stepping stones of getting on the QS, then like qualifying for the Challenger Series, getting to surf the bigger events, and hopefully getting onto the Championship Tour one day.
Who were some of the other young South African women when you were coming up? You mentioned you identify your competitors and you take from them and drive yourself. Like, who were some of the other ones that you were facing when you were coming up?
Well, I mean, Nikita Robb was someone that spent years on the Championship Tour. There was such a good crew of women when I was competing, younger generations, and it was super competitive, like crazy competitive. Like, we'd be staying at someone's house, and if I won an event, those people wouldn't speak to me for like a couple of days. It was just like, it was crazy. There was a lot of things that I was like, okay, that's a bit weird, but we'll roll with it. But it was cool. Like, there was like Tammany Smith, Stacey Guy, Nikita Robb, like I mentioned, and then even seeing Bianca Buitendag when she was just a Grom and recognizing the talent in her.
Connor at this stage, he's comboed. He's surfing this wave so well. And I think one of the things that struck me when this one first came across the screen is he looks like he's intentionally trying to incorporate more variety in this, as opposed to kind of just, time and carve. And his carves are so beautiful, but he's going higher in the pocket. He's doing floaters. And I guess at this stage, you kind of have to, right? Because you're behind the clock.
And that's one thing I touched on with Glenn Hall when I spoke to him in that earlier interview. I said, hey, Jordy, Connor, they have similar approaches. What do you think the point of difference is for Connor to get the edge on Jordy? And Glenn said, he's going to bring a variety in his surfing. So I think that's something that he's intentionally implementing into his surfing.
That's such a good thing to think about too, because there's a lot of different ways you can get excellent scores on tour. And you kind of see some people are very power-based and rail-based, and some people are kind of more progressive and fin-throwy. Jordy and Connor, in particular at this stage of both their careers, had kind of the power-based rail game going. But then Jordy, too, going back to kind of the 2008 conversation, vanguard of progression. He's able to do the airs, he's able to do the mixing it up. So, geez, yeah. I mean, you'd have a tall task with anybody coming up against Jordy in a heat like this, because it's like, what is your point of difference, and how are you going to get the judges to throw high scores at you?
Yeah, and I think for Connor's approach too, when I watch him, like, even though growing up on right-hand point breaks, he still seems pretty front-footed for a surfer. Because a lot of times when you grow up on right-hand point break, it's got a lot more push and a lot more power, which means you can kind of lean back on that back foot and it's almost a lazier approach, where Connor, like that front foot, he's pushing and exerting on that rail and really draws out every maneuver, which in my eyes, that's almost harder to do, but it's something that he's been able to just like do so beautifully.
For sure. We've got your colleague Strider on camera here. You, up until very recently, have been the only woman on the WSL commentary team, but it seems like you guys do have a really good blend, and I think probably the gender ratio has really just been a function of really kind of the gender ratio in the surfing world for a long time, but it feels like that's changing. What's your perspective on that?
I love our whole crew. I mean, isn't it incredible that this 2020 would have been our 7th year of kind of the same individuals traveling together, like renting cars together, doing all that stuff. And I have so much love and appreciation for our whole crew. And it's been so fun just having that dynamic, because as the only female, like, everyone is really, I feel like, protective over me. Like, I mean, Parks actually, he got a call from everyone, like, saying like, hey, like, take care of Rosy, because he's obviously got that Quicksilver connection. There was that Quicksilver connection back in the day, but and he brings it up. He was like, hey, I was told to look after you. And I was like, I know, like, I know that conversation happened, and it was from the get-go. Potts, like, took me under his wing. He really took that position of taking care of me. All the guys on the commentary team take care of me. And it's really nice too to have, a few more ladies on the commentary team to kind of interact with too, though.
Yeah, I think it's a great balance that we want to strive for. But like what you're getting at too is, we'll stop real quick because here's a heat recap. Oof.
Wow. Jordy, I mean, to open up with a 933 is just, I mean, that's a feather in your cap from the judges too, because it's really hard to set the scale when the waves are this perfect to immediately give that upper echelon of a score and reward it. I mean, there's no denying that this was like up in that range. Or was that? Yeah, that was the 933.
933, I think, for this first run. And then I think Connor ended up with an 867.
Oh my gosh. I mean, to have that timing, I mean, he goes so far up into that lip and just brings it back down. It's just like the intricacy of what he's doing too. I mean, this is all obviously in normal speed. When you really slow it down in those sections, it's just like so impressive.
And these two are quite different in terms of height too. Like Jordy's probably 6'2" in that space, and Connor's probably in the 5'8" range, you know, and so that being able to compress and for Jordy and then being able to push and kind of physically dominate the way Connor is, it's really impressive on kind of both their sides.
Definitely. I mean, we say that they've got similar approaches, but their contrasting styles are so evident. I mean, there's a lot of Parker-esque-ness to Jordy surfing on these long walls. And you can see like his lanky body in comparison to Connor, who's just like so strong and he just absorbs. I mean, Connor never really fully extends his body. I feel like he's always like a spring. He's coiled up, ready to really attack and kind of absorb anything that the wave's doing, where Jordy is kind of lanky and fluid and that style shines through.
You mentioned this was the year that Jordy started taking his fitness seriously. What insights do you have in that? Like, what was he doing? Was it diet? Was it yoga? What was he doing to kind of change his body type? And then what, I guess, from your perspective, was the goal, with your background?
I think everyone on tour, I think if you're not putting in that hard work, you're going to fall way behind. And I think for Jordy, I mean, he came in with these expectations of winning a world title straight away. You kind of have that eye-opening moment where you're like, wow, it's a lot harder than I thought it was. What other aspects can I reach into to kind of level up and get to that place? So I think it was, for Jordy, it was like, hey, I'm going to start taking this even more seriously. I don't know. I don't think he drank alcohol for like over a year. I think he really just had a look at what he was putting in his body and kind of made some serious life choices.
Yeah, and I mean, and the results have shown big time. Jeffreys Bay wasn't on tour when you were competing. And as you're there and you're commentating today, do you ever pause and think like, to this day, I could perform here amongst the top 17?
I don't know. The level of the woman is just mind-blowing. I mean, obviously, I'd love to be given the opportunity to have 35 minutes with no one out and like 12 jet skis in the lineup to keep us safe. But I just look at the level nowadays, and I have just such huge amounts of respect for what those women are doing. And I'm just so happy to see the women competing at Supertubes.
Maybe we can start maybe the lineup, this episode, the lineup can spawn give Rosy the wild card into JBAY. I mean,
honestly,
further to that,
I'd be embarrassed.
Oh, I mean, but then you wouldn't have to commentate. So you'd be like, well, I don't have to worry about that. Like,
they'd probably strap the water mic to me and be like, come on, double duty on your bike.
But further to that, I mean, the quality of waves on tour these days, Indonesia and in Fiji in the past and Trussels in the past, do you think that your surfing in particular would have flourished a bit more with sort of higher quality waves?
I definitely think better waves bring about better surfing. That's for sure. It's like, I look at the tour nowadays and it's just like with Maui and with Jeffreys Bay, Snapper Rocks, like Bells Beach. I mean, there's like a Karamas at G-Land. Are you kidding? Like there've been like so many spots implemented that just bring about the best surfing. So, I mean, it's easy to be like, yeah, definitely like 100%. Like if better waves, like I said, better surfing.
Snap predictions for when competition resumes. What do you think is going to happen for Connor? What do you think is going to happen for Jordy?
I mean, Connor is, wow. I mean, with the help of Glenn Hall and what he's been doing, he's had like such a great run in his career. I see him, continuing on that stride. For Jordy, it's always the hope that he's going to win a world title, right? And we wholeheartedly back him. So I would just, I mean, he's been in the mix with the world title conversation, but I want him to just, you know, just like, come on, guy, like break through. But then you think about like the Itzelos, the Gabbies, the Johns, and you're just like, wow, it's intense.
Do you like that? Well, if so, subscribe over there and then watch more videos over there. And then tell us your favorite videos down there. It's a 3-step process. Do them all now.